Hello and welcome to the Halves Postulate. Let's take a look at these first given. So MH is congruent to AH. We're going to put little tick marks there, which automatically makes swooshes on these base angles. Because remember, if two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the opposite angles are congruent. Then we're going to take a look at the next piece, and it says that medians AB and MT are drawn. So median cuts the base into two congruent parts. So that means that this piece is going to be congruent to this piece. And ironically, on the other side of the triangle, we have the same two tick marks. So what I'd like you to think about for a second is if this piece was in fact 20 units long, and this piece was 20 units long, if we were to take half of each of those, they would wind up to be 10 and 10. So basically the halves postulate says that if you have equal quantities and you cut them in half, then the resulting halves will also be equal quantities. Now we're also going to take a look at the next thing. We're trying to prove that angle MBA, which is this one right here, is congruent to ATM, which is this one right there. And if you look real carefully, we could probably prove that the triangles are congruent once we use the reflexive piece there. And then we would have side angle side. Side angle side to prove the triangles are congruent, and then CPCTC in order to prove that the angles are congruent. Let's take a look at what the proof looks like. So this was the given part and the part that was labeled. So let's take a look. We start with MH is congruent to AH given, and then we're going to go that angle HMA is congruent to HAM. If two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the opposite angles are congruent. Now after that we go to the red pieces, which are the medians. So AB and MT are medians, and that's given. Now remember, with the fact that they were medians, we're going to use what's called the halves postulate, but first we want to say that HB is congruent to BM and HT is congruent to TA because a median cuts the base of a triangle into two congruent parts. Now, in order to use the halves postulate, you want to state that the large piece is congruent to the large piece, and then the two smaller pieces are halves of each other. So since we've already done that, now we're going to move to what's called the halves postulate. And this is how it would be written. 1/2 of MH is congruent to 1/2 of AH, or MB is congruent to AT. So notice again, this or always seems to happen when we have used either the addition or the subtraction postulate. So we're going to use this or right here. 1/2 of MH is congruent to 1/2 of AH, or MB is congruent to AT. And the important part here is that MB and AT are the pieces that are in the triangle that we're trying to prove. So that's the halves postulate. Then in order to use side angle side, we need to include MA as congruent to MA, the reflexive property. Then it's an easy proof from here, and we're just going to do the triangles are congruent based on side angle side, and then the angles are congruent based on corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So I'll leave that up here for a second. You need to make sure you copy the whole thing, please. The halves postulate, again, is going to be dealing right here with the fact that the big pieces are congruent and the halves are congruent. You would need to do these three together in order to use the halves postulate. Thanks, and I'll see you tomorrow.